Yo, what's good? Today on the podcast, I had Wally Zeins. Wally is an American police officer from New York City who specialized in hostage negotiation and narcotics. We also had his dog on the show. So sorry about that. It was a little noisy. Gonna have to cut in and out every once in a while, but no big deal. Wally was super interesting to have a conversation with. He's lived many lives and has a lot of knowledge to pass on. Please give it up for Wally Zeins.
In the land of China, people hardly got nothing at all.
No possessions?
And in China, they never go to church.
No religion too?
Or do magic.
Well, it's easy if you try, Dick.
3, 2, 1. Okay, we're live. Wally, how are you doing? Thank you for having me over.
Hey, it's great to see you. You've really grown up.
It's been a long time. The last thing I can remember about this place is maybe, I don't know, it must have been 15 years ago. Me, Jed, and Pierce were hanging out in the basement, and all of a sudden you get a call, and you're like, hang on, guys, wait on 1 second. And then the next thing we know, you're on TV, on the phone, while you're doing some type of, I don't know if it was hostage negotiation or it was a car crash and you're commentating. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I worked for CNN at the time.
Oh.
And I retired from the police department in 2004.
Mm-hmm.
And what had happened, I had, prior to that, my experience with the hostage negotiation team with the New York City Police Department. I spent 22 years there, and I landed up having a lot of experiences, and CNN was getting hostage incidents, barricade incidents, people that wanted to jump off a building or a roof.
Oh.
And if it was something that had a lot of time in it, they would call me and I would do a play-by-play and tell them what goes on within the negotiation process.
Wow, very interesting. Yeah, before, can you give a brief introduction of yourself to the audience? So I know you've been a cop. If a brief introduction on what you've done.
Well, I went into the police department in 1973. I've been in the police department for 30 years. Prior to the police department, I worked in hospital administration. Prior to that, I worked when I was a teenager, I worked as an ambulance driver in Brooklyn for Kings County Hospital.
Is that one of your first jobs?
Yeah, it was one of my first jobs.
Kings County Hospital, ambulance driver. So what did it take to get that job?
Have a license.
You were just the driver.
Yeah, and then eventually I became a technician, which was then a 2-week course in first aid. And I became a ambulance technician. And it was very exciting because, living in Brooklyn, there's always action going on, always things happening. Yeah. And I was king of the road.
Is that where you're from?
Yes, Brooklyn.
Wow, you grew up in Brooklyn. Okay. So that was your first introduction. What was it like growing up in Brooklyn? What time, like what decade was that for, like, let's say elementary school or?
Well, I grew up in East New York, Brownsville.
Okay.
And it was a neighborhood that was starting to change. And I grew up there, and it was very interesting because it was like survival of the fittest.
Yeah.
It was a crazy area, and there's always fights, and there was always things going on. In fact, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to become a cop. I would see the cops day and night.
Yeah.
And I saw, all the power that they and the fire department and the ambulance service had when they would scream down the streets. I said, I want to do that someday. And then when I became old enough, I got a driver's license, and I applied for a job as an ambulance driver. And that was my first excitement, and that sold me. My life was going to be lights and sirens.
Yeah. That's super interesting that it seems like your motivation might have been maybe a little bit of power. Would you say, like, did you have any hardship growing up in East New York? Was that, like, you said it was a tough place?
I had some hardship. My father was a compulsive gambler, and he would always go and borrow money from loan sharks. And, it was a very different way of growing up. We were very poor. And my father was a junk peddler, more or less, secondhand furniture.
You keep this just a little bit closer.
He'd have a truck, and I would go along with him on it, and we'd pick up stuff that people would throw out on the street, batteries, pillows. Some places we'd take furniture from the homes that they'd offer to us, and we'd resell it. And it was a hustle, but you get that PhD from the street. You learn how to hustle and be hustled. And then the opportunities came where in the 60s, there was an opportunity in the neighborhood to have a walk-in police test to join the New York City Police Department. And a group of my friends and I went to a Brooklyn Tech High School, took the test, and they had a budgetary crisis, so no one got called for many years. And then one day, when I got out of college, I got a letter, welcome, do you want to join NYPD?
Wow.
And I was working as a hospital administrator at the time. And I said, yeah, I want to do this. I'm tired of sitting behind a desk and not having the fun that I once used to have. So I took the job, went into the police academy, did my 6 month there, and got assigned to a precinct. And that's when the fun and games began.
Wow. Something I've found with most of my guests and a lot of successful people is that they have to go through, a lot of them have gone through hardship in the process of getting to where they are. And then it turns out that even like, for example, if you've gone through hardship and then you have kids and they don't go through hardship, they're not going to end up becoming successful. Do you have any thoughts on how your upbringing may have shaped what you've become today?
A lot of my upbringing was, it was from the negative things that happened to me. You know, we were growing up as an adolescent. There was many times we'd have a lot of street justice in the sense of fighting and gangs and all the different things that you do growing up. But they were much more dangerous. Where I grew up in East New York, there was knives were involved. Everything was a hustle on the street.
Wow.
You had to really be survival of the fittest in the sense of teaming up with the right group, and that's how gangs got started too. I remember growing up in Brooklyn, we started a gang called the Egyptian Lords. I have no idea how that name came about, but we were the Egyptian Lords, and we had our own little territory, our property, our little domain.
Egyptian Lords. Do you remember any of your friends from back then? Do you ever keep in touch with any of the other Egyptian Lords?
I've saw one at my high school reunion, my 50-year high school reunion. Alvin, and Alvin was a crazy little guy. He would climb. He was a climber, and I didn't see any of the others. A few of them went to jail,
right?
And that was about it. I moved on. Then from there, when I left East New York, I moved to Flatbush. I went to PS 181, which is public school in Brooklyn. Then from there, I went to Walt Whitman Junior High School. And after that, I went to Erasmus Hall High School, which was a very large school. And that was my my academic years before I went to college.
So touching on, it was a very tough neighborhood. Today, I think it's pretty clear to say we're a lot more politically correct today than we have been, in the 60s. And some might say it's just going overboard. I don't know if you followed any of that stuff, but if you have any thoughts on, compared to there's things called safe spaces in schools today, where if you feel uncomfortable with a topic in a class, you just get up and leave. That's a thing that happens in a lot of colleges. And I would say that's exactly opposite to what you had to deal with growing up.
No,
so
never had that.
Yeah. So what do you think about that? Do you think it's gone too far, or what direction? Do you think it's going in a good direction?
I don't know. Everything has changed today. It's because of social media. Social media brings everything into real time.
Right.
And in real time, it's not where you have time to think about it. You make many times knee-jerk reactions. So it's important that think before you leap or jump. I know that, safe haven, for example, away from education, we have it in police departments, and we have it in firehouses and hospitals. If you have a child that you don't want, you can drop a child off there. These are safe havens.
Wow.
And in relationship to yours, I guess in a way, I don't look at it as a very good situation, because you may have a course, say, in calculus. You just want to get out of it, but somewhere along the line, you may need that course in calculus.
Yeah.
or or some biology, and you just don't like the teacher, or you just leave. It opens up a lot of doors for you to have excuses to leave the course.
I definitely agree. I think that's the biggest thing you're going to miss out on is if you always feel comfortable, then you're never going to like put yourself out of your box to learn something new. Because I think the biggest times that I've learned something new is when you feel uncomfortable. You have to somewhat be uncomfortable to learn something new.
Well, that's the learning process, the good and the bad and the in-between.
Definitely. Let's jump back a little bit to your jumping into the police academy. So you said it was the 60s. There was an open call to get in. Yeah. So, and then you said there was a budget crisis.
Yes. After taking the test, it was like many years that they had a budget crisis. And then in 1973, they opened up the list again. I got called, and I went into the police academy. And it was a whole new experience.
Oh, so it's from 60 to 73?
Yeah, there was they did not open the test because there was
just a budget issue. And that's when New York might have just been like a pretty bad time, right?
Yes.
Don't worry about it. The garbage is here? He's okay.
Anyway, so I got into the police department in 1973, had to go through the physical, how to do psychological, how to take all the prerequisites to get into the police academy. Finally into the police academy, it was a lot of physical fitness, a lot of academics, law, social science, and learning how to use a weapon.
Yeah, and then so you graduate, and what, like, the idea I get of like you graduate and like you're on the block, you're like first rung, right? So what is the process like after you first graduate?
Well, when I went into the police academy, I was one of the first group of people that had graduated from college, because all you needed at that time was a high school diploma. And I went in, and they took a group of us who had college, who graduated from college, and we would go to a precinct where they had, I went to a precinct which was a very low crime at the time precinct, out of the mainstream of precincts, where they would put cops who had certain problems, like they were they assaulted people.
So the police officers themselves had problems.
Yeah, the police officers more or less had problems. They were. It was more or less. It was like the Dirty Dozen in a sense, but it was the most rude awakening I ever had. In a sense that a lot of these police officers were very street smart, and you learned a lot, but you had to learn what you were taught in the police academy, because it was a type of academy where, for an example, there was some violent-prone cops there. Yeah. There were guys that came back from a farm who were alcoholics, and we have in the police department for rehab. They have what we call a farm, where you go in for a number of months. Oh, the farm. I've heard that term before. Like, you're sent to the farm. Sent to the farm to get rehabilitated. Yeah. It's like AA, 12 steps. Sure. And it was very interesting because I had a training officer. Everyone gets a training officer when you get out of the police academy. And I remember the first thing he said to me: "What you learned in the academy, kid, is very different what you're going to learn on the street here." Yeah. And he was absolutely right. Things were very different, and you learn from your mistakes. Definitely. There's the trash, ladies and gentlemen. So getting back to, not you learn from your mistakes, but like, okay, you're saying there's a lot of troubled police officers. Not a lot of trouble. This was a precinct that was like that. They didn't have college education. And they felt that, the police department felt that it would be interesting to put educated people with the uneducated or troubled. With the non-college graduates. And to a certain extent, it was different in the way that, you looked upon very differently because of you had the college education, they didn't. But they still were your training officers. You were mentioning
police officers that were troubled. And a lot of people today, they sometimes get upset with law enforcement because they think like it can be, they're against them somehow. What are your thoughts on maybe, first of all, do you agree with that there are a lot of police officers that sometimes, police brutality is a term that's used.
Mhm.
So do you think there's, like, what are your thoughts on that in terms of the public's perception on that? Because a lot of people in the public get upset, like, oh, cops are just beating up on certain people.
It's not true. There's always two. Did you ever see a pancake? You never ate one side of a pancake. There's two sides to a pancake,
Right.
just like there's two sides to a story.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting is that from my perspective, before becoming going in the police department, I grew up in a troubled area. We had gangs. We had fights and everything. We were never very respectful towards the police because they were the ones that would always come to break things up, and if you committed a crime, you'd be arrested.
Mm-hmm.
And when I went in the police academy, I went in the police academy because of the benefits in the sense of medical benefits they gave you. There was a retirement program. I didn't have any of these things. I didn't even have medical insurance growing up. And I grew up in a very blue-collar neighborhood,
Mm-hmm.
and parents told their kids to take it. And this was a walk-in test. There was no fee. Didn't have to pay.
Mm-hmm.
And we went in there and took the test. Some of us passed. Some of us failed. And I took that path. And it was probably the best thing that I ever did in my life.
Yeah, my personal thoughts are that exactly what you said. There's two sides to every story. So when you see, like, if all you want to look at is some bad eggs that do some bad things, you're gonna only see that side of the story. And I think getting back to how you're saying social media highlights everything, like today it just becomes so much more easy to see only that or see one side of the story.
True. I mean, it's very funny. The police department at the time, when I came in the 70s, they wanted us to, project more community policing.
Mhm.
Community policing today is the answer to better communications, better relationships with the community. But it was funny because I was in a Spanish area, and they gave us these handouts to be able to talk with the Spanish community
Wow.
in a better way. We had the English-Spanish translation. But it was so bizarre because some of the phrases that they give you was like, drop the knife, do you need a tow truck,
Oh my
get
God.
against the wall, do you need an ambulance? I mean,
Oh my God.
it was nothing like, hello, how are you?
No community building at all.
No, it was all commands for emergency situations.
Yeah.
And a lot of them were arrest situations, like
Yeah.
get your hands against the wall.
That's funny. That's just like setting you up for a hostile, first impressions are everything.
Right.
And if you come off as a guy who wants to arrest you, like, of course, they're not going to be so, So what do you think about that? Like, in terms of initiating conversation between someone, because you got to fear for your life if you're pulling someone over. You don't know what's going on in that car. So I can understand, being a little on edge.
True. Most cops get hurt on car stops and domestic violence jobs. That's where you have the most serious injuries or deaths in the law enforcement community. And but you train for all this. It's important. And I bring up a point when you talk about recruitment today. It has to change because it's so diverse. In New York City Police Department with over 35,000 members, you have so many different ethnic groups. We're taking people from Middle East. We're taking them from the Asian communities, from the Hispanic communities, and you have to be able to, like a cornucopia, you have to be able to blend, and it's so important. And the recruitment process now, is changing. You can't make a Chihuahua out of a pit bull. You got to recruit the Chihuahua in that neighborhood and bring them into the police department.
Right.
You got to bring someone in there that's not the type of person that, I don't like this ethnic group or I don't like that. And the police department has to design the proper questioning
Mm.
when they interview you for for the particular job.
Yeah.
It's changed dramatically, and it's not just cop versus the community. The community, the Board of Education, especially the media, they all have to work together.
Mm-hmm.
And once you get all that in place, you get a better running machine.
Yeah,
And community policing is the name of the game.
definitely. Um, Speaking from my perspective, living in Shanghai for the past 5 years, they have an interesting way of how they do the policing system. They operate on a very community basis. For example, there's a cop on every single corner, but they have different levels of cops. They have like what you would consider like they look like military police. They're driving around in like a Porsche that has these loud sirens, and I think there's like only a couple hundred officers in Shanghai that are armed with guns. And then there must be thousands, if not like tens of thousands of officers who I would call street cops. And they have almost no authority. Like they can maybe write you like a police ticket. But if I find that the communities tend to police themselves a little better when you have less authority feeling like on every block. And then even I'll see like, squabbles on the streets of people bickering, and the street cops, the ones on the corner, will just stand there and kind of just hang out and make sure nothing gets violent. But even if people are yelling face to face and it looks like it could flip at any moment, it doesn't, just because the person who's there actually has been living on that block for maybe their whole lives. So I wanted to hear your thoughts on that compared to what we do in America.
Well, we're different. We're different in the sense that in our community policing, we keep the police officers on the street, in the neighborhood, not in the car all the time. They're usually patrolling business sectors. They're going to schools. They're working with the community. They're giving first name basis. It's just becoming a friendship, developing the friendship. It's trust. It's like when we talk about later hostage negotiating, the whole name of the game is trust, developing a rapport. And that's how this system works.
Right. So it's just a different kind of maybe ideology, perhaps. I'd like to jump past you're in the police community, or you're an officer. At what point do you start to specialize?
Well, you got to do your probationary period. That includes your academy, and it also includes your 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then once you pass your 2 years on the job, then you could look into specialized areas. The NYPD has many specialized areas. There's career routes you can take. You can take a patrol route where you stay in uniform. You can take an investigative route, and you can also take special operations route. Now, special operation deals with canine units, helicopter pilot, mounted units, emergency services. I decided I liked the investigative route, and for me, the investigative route is what I took.
Okay.
And it was interesting, very interesting, because you learn a lot of things that you never thought of. You're given a lot of different jobs to respond to, and you work with a team.
Don't worry about it. We could just pause for a second.
Zeus, no. Zeus. You'll be able to edit it.
Yeah, don't worry about it. What were you saying?
I was saying that I took the investigative route. The investigative route to me was very exciting because you have different areas. You have organized crime. You have public morals. You have sex crimes. You have hostage negotiating. You have homicide, organized crime, gangs. It's so many different investigative areas. And I've been in most of them, and they were all very different and exciting.
Interesting. So what year was this when you started to get into the investigative route?
77.
Oh, 77. Wow, so you're not even into the 80s yet. What was one of your, do you have any first story, like something interesting that happened related to investigating? Or
Well, one of the first reasons why I became a an investigator. My goal was to get my gold shield, as we call it.
What's that mean?
Become a detective.
Oh, become a detective.
Yeah, that's pretty special. It's sexy, and it's a nice honor. When you get a detective shield, it's not a test, but you serve at the pleasure of the police commissioner, and it's really nice. So there was a program in the police department, which still is there, that if you make an integrity collar, a collar is an arrest. That's cop terminology. We have our
Make a
own
collar.
terminology.
Yeah.
There's police and there's civilians. And civilians speak one way, we speak the
Sure.
other. So I was in uniform and I was assigned to Washington Square Park. I had just come. Let me backtrack for a second. I was when I was started off, I went into the 9-4 precinct out of the police academy. Almost a year later, they had another budgetary crisis, and they laid us off again for 2 years.
Wow. You were laid off for 2 years?
Yeah.
Okay.
And during those 2 years, I took a job as a cop in Rockland County, New York, in a narcotics task force. And I was a undercover narcotics investigator there.
Interesting.
And eventually, I got called back to the police department, and I had some new knowledge in narcotics investigations, and I was back in uniform when they called me back, and I was working in Washington Square Park, and we had what they call a condition of a lot of drug dealing going on there. And I observed a guy selling drugs in the park. My partner and I went up to him, and we arrested him because he had some drugs on him. He had heroin, he had some coke, and he had some marijuana. And while we were at the precinct processing him, he offered me a bribe. He said, listen, you make this go away, I'll take care of you right now with a nice piece of change. And I said, sit there, let me just talk to my partner. So I went and spoke to my sergeant. There's a procedure that we do.
Right.
And he notified Internal Affairs. And I went back to the guy and said, let me see what I can do about this. And Internal Affairs came to the precinct. They wired me up with hidden microphone and tape recorder. And I went up to him. I said, all right, you give me the $500. I'll take it and we'll cut you loose. So he had quite a bit of money that we were vouchering from the drug deals that he was selling.
I was just cash on him, yeah.
Because everything that's on your possession gets vouched.
Sure.
And when he gave me the $500, the deal was it. Told him, thanks, you're being locked up for bribery.
Right.
And then I went before the Integrity Review Board, and they ask you, where do you want to go? Because you're in the Integrity Review Board is that board that interviews you because you made an integrity collar, and you have an opportunity, instead of waiting for your career path for a number of years, you can go right into a special assignment. And I said I wanted to take the investigative route. So they put me in the organized crime unit. And I went into the organized crime unit, and I worked narcotics.
It's fascinating. I think it's so interesting how, I'm personally just seeing a parallel between growing up in a rough neighborhood and maybe having to pick a side, gangs and stuff. And then you kind of I'm not being rude when I say this, police officers can almost be looked at as a gang. You have your own language, you said, and you're operating with your own people. And you're doing it for the good reasons. And
we look at it as a team, not a gang.
I know, but if you forgive my terminology, but
I forgive you.
You can see the the parallels between having a team. Sure, you're on your own team. And what's cool is that you initially chose the right thing to do. You went to Internal Affairs. I was listening to this podcast, and it was this about this guy who he made the wrong decision at the first point that you took. He took the offer and he took a kilo of coke instead of bringing the guy in. And then from then on, it was just went down the wrong road. So
what happens in a case like that is once you take the bribe, you're now he has you under his control or she has you under her
Exactly.
control.
The person who bribed you.
Because they can blackmail you
Exactly.
in a heartbeat saying,
You
know,
join their team once you
right.
do that. Yeah, that's fascinating. Did you ever have to deal with like crooked cops?
yes,
You
I'll
must
get
have had
that.
to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, while I was working in my narcotics, after I went through the Integrity Review Board, I was sent to the Brooklyn District Attorney Squad, the Organized Crime Rackets Bureau. And while I was there, we did corruption cases involving organized crime. And we had some cases that involved that. And I had one case where I was buying drugs from a cop.
Right. Yeah.
And he went to jail. He might even still be in there.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, like, because from this guy's interview that I heard, you know what? Like back in, I think it was the 80s or definitely the 70s or 80s. It's like 75% of the police force was corrupt. This was a stat. I don't know how true this stat is.
I don't think it's that. There was certain, every 20 years in NYPD, and I can only speak for NYPD.
Okay.
There's always some sort of corruption scandal. It happens every 20 years.
Yeah.
And there are good cops, there are bad cops, and there are good people in every profession and bad people in every profession. So it's really hard to say that statistical number. When I made sergeant, I got promoted. I was still working as an undercover detective when I got promoted to sergeant, and I couldn't even go to my graduation because I was working in organized crime, in some very long-term organized crime stuff. And they didn't want to have my identity.
Sure.
So once that case broke, and it was an interesting case, it was a case in Brooklyn with the Gambino crime family, and it lasted about 9 months. And after that, I got promoted to sergeant, and they have a policy in NYPD that you have to work in internal affairs when you become a sergeant. Automatically, and they teach you how to steal and get caught. And
Wow.
I'll tell you something. It is like shooting fish in a barrel, how greedy people can be and how easy it is to catch them.
Yeah.
And we've had a few, when I was doing that, there was a few pretty unfortunate cases where law enforcement did get in trouble and did go to jail.
Yeah, because, I mean, the stat isn't so important to me, but if one stat, let's just say it was above 50%, let's just say for argument's sake, if that stat was true, it becomes a point where more than half your team is potentially against you. Because I'm sure like you fell into the camp as a straight and narrow cop, and then the cops that are in the not so straight and narrow.
Well,
so did it ever get to a point where it's like there are more people against me, and that could be like frightening for job security and friendship and loyalty and
life and death?
Life and death, sure.
No, I had an experience before as I mentioned to you earlier, I was working in the Rockland County Narcotics Task Force. When I got laid off from NYPD, I was an investigator there. And you team up with other law enforcement personnel from other areas of New York State. And we were doing a drug buy, my partner and I. And we took this guy, we met him in a motel. And we were buying like $20,000 worth of, they called it White Crosses. It was a pill. And the guy offered us a bribe. And my partner said to me, let's take the bribe.
This is your partner.
My partner.
You trust him.
You trust him. Yeah. Anyway, so I said, well, if we're going to take the bribe, I'm going to lock you up and him up. And that ended our partnership. But it turned out he was even a worse cop. When I got called back to the police department, he still stayed in Rockland County Police Department, and he got locked up for selling guns to criminals, and he landed up dying of a drug overdose.
Yeah, see, this is what I'm saying. It's like such a hard line to not get into because it's so easy. It's so incredibly easy. So to get onto the bad team, let's just call it the bad team for just terminology. So what do you think it was that drove you to not do that? Was it pure morals? Was it like a certain drive or?
Well, no, I had a family,
Hmm.
mother and father, and a sister. And I know when you get arrested as a cop, you get exploited all over the media.
That and in jail, you're going to have a way
And
worse experience in jail.
You don't want to go into the general population. You want to go into be segregated because
Okay.
you get the crap beat out of you every day, if
Mm.
not killed.
Yeah. Wow. Oh dear. See, it's a scary world in there. But moving on a little bit to we didn't talk about hostage negotiation much yet. Can you remember your first time doing that? Because I don't know anyone who's a hostage negotiator.
Well, I spent 22 years in the hostage team. I went in the hostage team, and you just don't go right into negotiating.
Hmm.
You have to go to school, and you have to take psychological testing. You got to do a lot of role playing. You also, the SWAT team, our emergency service unit that goes on every hostage team, they're our backup.
Hmm.
You also have to learn every weapon, heavy weapon, we call it, that they use because, God forbid, they get shot and there's a gunfight. You want to be able to pick up their weapon.
Right.
And also, you have to train in a weapon, and you're constantly being trained in psychological situations.
Hmm.
You learn that there are only 4 types of hostage incidents. They are a professional criminal, which is basically the easiest one to negotiate. He walks into a supermarket and holds it up. Someone hits a silent alarm and the police surround the place. He just wants to get out.
Hmm.
And it's fairly easy to negotiate with that. The second one is a prison inmate. That one you want to do fast because he or she usually wants better conditions. And if they are holding any correction officers hostage, they have other inmates that just may get more and more inmates
Hmm.
to come into the situation. So you want to try and end that as quickly as you can. The third one is the terrorist.
Hmm.
And the terrorist is a martyr. If you kill him, he still will say he won because he
Yeah.
was a martyr. And that takes a while. But, you learn different, they teach us different terrorism techniques to talk with people like that. And the fourth one is the longest one. We call it EDP, an emotionally disturbed person.
Hmm.
And that takes the longest because that's an individual that has something wants to say and no one wants to listen to it.
Yeah.
And that usually happens with domestic violence, domestic cases. We must do in NYPD today around 380 plus calls a year. And they're not just hostages. They're barricaded situations. They're hostages.
Hmm.
And there are a lot of mostly domestic violence
Hmm.
where there's a order of protection and police come and we start to negotiate.
Wow. That's very interesting to know, like they can just classify it into 4. Terrorism. So have you done all 4?
Yes.
Can you share any stories with the terrorism one?
I had one terroristic incident. It was a guy by the name of Mordechai Levy. And Mordechai was the president of the JDO, the Jewish Defense Organization, not the JDL, the Jewish Defense League. And he apparently was living in Manhattan, and he had 2 men posing as marshals to come to his house, and he felt that they were not marshals; they were, people to kill him. And
Paranoia.
he landed up barricading himself in his apartment. He said he had a lot of explosives and guns, and being Jewish, I was able to. He said to the negotiating team that got there first, he said, "I don't want to talk to any Gentiles, any Goyim, or any blacks, or any Hispanics. I only want to talk to a Jew."
Okay.
So at the time, I was probably one of the only Jewish negotiators in the police department.
Mm-hmm.
And we set up a conversation. We gave him what we call a crisis phone, where he was able to talk to me from my vantage point to him. And we went back and forth for a while. And first thing he said to me, "What was your name?" I told him my Hebrew name is Velvel, which it was
Hmm.
and is. And he's, he would say things like, "Why don't you come into my apartment? Let's sit down and have some tea." And you just don't go in an apartment where they might have explosives and weapons.
Sure.
So I told him, let's talk here, and developed a rapport with him. And after a while, he said, "Why don't we get my attorney and you get the district attorney, and we'll talk."
Oh my God.
And eventually he came out, and that was my first terrorist. He was considered a terrorist.
Because of the explosives?
That, and also because he was part of the JDO.
Okay. So to be a terrorist, does that mean because he was religious?
No, because he was in this. It was a faction.
What does a faction mean?
A faction is like the FALN or the Black September. These are groups of- these are
NAACP?
group-
Is that a faction?
It could be it could be the NAACP. It could be any group, but this was a group.
Oh, if you represent a group, that's the most.
He was the president of a group that was against for instance, the incident that took place in Germany when they had the Munich the Olympics, when they had the Olympics.
Okay.
It was the FALN and the Black September, and it was like, these are groups that fight against each other. The JDO fought against the Arabs who wanted to take over Israel.
Okay.
So that was one. I've had many domestic hostage incidents where a boyfriend would be holding his girlfriend hostage because he wanted to see her. She had an order of protection. I've had bank robberies. I've had.
Tell me about a bank robbery, because that's something you feel like you would only see in the movies, and I've never even heard of many reported in the news, and maybe that's a strategic thing to not report them in the news or the media.
No, they usually do if it's long enough. And I had a bank robbery in Park Slope. It was over at Chase Manhattan Bank, and it turned out that two guys held up the bank, and they were barricaded in one of the areas, and they didn't want to come out. And interesting, they started burning the money, figuring
Really?
that they didn't steal anything. But the interesting part about that is that bank robberies, the jurisdiction is the FBI, and we were there ahead of them. And they would come in and they would want to do their negotiating.
Right.
And our program works that as long as you have a dialogue going and it's gaining progress, then you'll you continue the dialogue.
Really? So that's where a lot of probably friction comes in, because you have two people that want to flex their power, and then and it could be kind of an opinion thing. Do you really have this under control? And it's like, I think I do, but maybe you don't.
The way you look at it, as long as in hostage negotiating, as long as you have a dialogue going and you're not lying and you keep everything in a very honest way, and you use words like, "I understand, tell me about it, I'm listening," you develop a rapport. We never use third-party intermediaries like psychiatrists, psychologists, or a social worker to come in and start talking with the hostage taker. Why?
Yeah.
Because we're a Band-Aid effect. They come in, they start talking. Well, tell me, when you were growing up, did you hate your father? Did you hate your mother? And it has nothing to do with what we're trying to do. So we try to get in and get out as quickly as possible.
Right. Yeah. With any of the bank ones, has it ever resulted in a shootout when you're dealing
like Dog Day Afternoon?
I'm not familiar with. I'm assuming that's a movie, or
that was a movie. No, I didn't have a shooting there. I had a shooting incident in Queens where the guy eventually killed himself.
Oh wow!
And that was a very tragic incident because no matter who the person is, they're still a human being.
Sure.
And psychologically, you tell yourself, what did I do wrong? Could I have done better? And it's a tough, but it's a very rewarding assignment, especially when you get the hostages out, or you talk the hostage taker, the barricaded person, the emotionally disturbed person out of whatever harm they're going to do.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine, because as you said, you get all of these it's an amazing feeling. And then unfortunately, the negative, probably like that one negative one, can maybe outweigh some of the positive ones.
They do, but it's a nice feeling to save a life. I had one in Queens where a guy just got out of jail, and in fact, it was on 48 Hours. They were doing a special on our hostage team, and it turned out that I got called to go to this hostage incident. And this guy just got out of jail. He wanted to see his girlfriend and his daughter. And when he got to the house, she wasn't there. Her child was, and mother and another person got into an argument with him, and he shot both of them, killing one. And I became the negotiator. It was like 7-8 hours of negotiating.
Wow.
About 7 hours, I'd say. And he finally sent the kid out, the baby.
That's the most important thing.
Yeah, and the other hostage, and he ended up killing himself.
Yeah. Some people are just maybe sick. You know, they need more help than 6 hours can get them.
True. There's a lot that goes on, you know. But again, you're the Band-Aid effect. You want to get to the point, find out what's taken their mind away from a normal life, and you try to bring them out.
Right. Let's move on to a little bit of the undercover work, because I saw on Instagram, one of your sons, they shared a photo of you as a Hasidic Jew.
Yeah.
So tell me
Velvel, back to Velvel.
That's back to codename Velvel. So you were walking around. Like, tell me about that. Like, how long do you go undercover? Does that affect your personal life? Like, just tell me about being undercover.
Well, you develop a new identity.
Yeah.
And, you know, you train for it. We have undercover school where you learn things. You learn to get a name that's you're familiar with. Like, I used...
Try to talk into the top of the...
There were times that I would use my middle name, Robert. And because that you remember. Mm-hmm. I never would use my first name, Wallace. Mm-hmm. But we had a case in Brooklyn where the Hasidic community, there was a real estate head that wanted to buy up many large buildings owned by the city. Mm-hmm. And the real estate inspector who met with him said, this is the building, this is the price. And he said to him, we'd like you to leave the asbestos in the building. And we'd also like you to lower the square feet, even though the building was bigger, and we'll pay you. So he went to the police department, and I was working in a special unit at the time. I was working in a Department of Investigation, which was responsible for 13 mayoral agencies and not the police department. And they had a real estate guy who was going to introduce to get the money. And he would only talk to us. He was a Hasidic Jew from Williamsburg, Brooklyn. And he would only talk to another Hasidic Jew. Yeah. In the Hasidic community, it's interesting. You know, when a crime's committed, they usually go to their rabbi, not the police. Yeah. And they try to negotiate and settle it outside of using law enforcement. Yeah. So anyway, we had this guy, and I was going to meet him. I was now the new building person from the city who was going to keep the asbestos and lower the square footage. Mm-hmm. So I went to the neighborhood, and for a number of weeks we watched the way the people dressed. And I was able to grow my beard long and get their garb, their dress. Yeah. And I had what they call payas. And
I just paused for a second.
Zeus, come here. Zeus.
It's okay.
And I got their dress. I would go to a shop, a tailor that made their clothing in Williamsburg. For instance, the buttons, like we button our shirt from the right to the left, they button it from the left to the right.
You got to have those details.
You have to have all the details. And the types of shirt that you have to wear. Anyway, so I made one deal with him, and I would go. It took about 6 months, this case, and I'd meet him every 2 weeks, and I'd come with paperwork from the city showing him the lowered square footage that he wanted, and he would pay me off. And then we were ready for the big slam dunk. We had to do at least 2 buys from him.
Sure.
To bring it up to the next level.
Yeah, that, like to make the charges higher, correct?
And I met with him, and he started looking at me, and he says, "You know, Velvel, I don't know. I don't think you're work for the buildings department. Your shirt is too clean."
Oh my goodness!
And he said, I'm not doing the deal. So we only got him for the other 2 charges.
Wow. Smart cookie.
Smart cookie. He made me, and he said, "You're probably a cop." And my shirt was clean. They didn't see. And what he really said is, "I don't see any soup stains, nothing." So,
oh my God.
But it was interesting to grow it and, grow the beard, play the role.
Did you actually curl your hair, or was that like...
Yeah.
That was real.
Everything was real.
I think that's fascinating because
Did you ever see the picture?
Yeah, sure. I saw the picture. I saw it on Instagram. Oh my goodness. So what I think is really cool about that is like you lived another life for a little bit. How many months? How long did you do this?
About 6 months.
6 months. See, that is, I would have been surprised if it was 2. 6 months is a true amount of time to have like lived in someone else's shoes a little bit, just a glimpse. I think that's fascinating.
It is. You go home at night, you shower up and shampoo out your curls.
Mm-hmm.
And it was fun. No one got hurt. That's the most important thing. I mean, when I worked in narcotics, there were times that came very close to really getting hurt.
Right. So that was the Hasidic Jew story is like a most peaceful situation.
It was a white collar crime.
White collar crime is what you want to deal with for your health and safety. Let's talk about
not all the time. White collar crime involves more money than violent crime.
Of course. Would that be what determines it's white collar crime, the money?
No, it's, for instance, I've done quite a few white collar crimes where we had building inspectors who were taking bribes, health inspectors taking bribes. Those are more or less the white collar crime.
So maybe more to do with like government, like official paperwork and like...
Right. Paper.
Yeah. Paper trail.
Always paper trail. There's always a paper trail. Just about everything there's a paper trail.
Yeah. So the narcotics, because I've heard some stories from your son and yourself and whatever you want to share. I've heard some crazy stuff. And just like close calls and...
Zeus, no, come here. Zeus. What were you saying?
Close calls with narcotics.
I had one. I had a few. I had one where I was buying heroin from a guy, and the guy said, "If you're a cop, you're not going to snort the drugs." And I was buying heroin, and I wasn't going to shoot it. I said, "I'll snort it." And I had to snort it, and he had a rifle right to the back of my head.
Oh my God.
And no question about it, I snorted it. And I also, immediately told my supervisors when I left with the drugs that I didn't snort.
Yeah.
And they took me to the hospital, and I went through whatever, procedure had to be done.
Detox pretty much, probably. Like.
And, I've had that. We've had incidents of people pulling knives on you and trying to rip you off.
Yeah.
Police work can be very dangerous, but keep in mind, police work doesn't discriminate. It can happen anywhere. It can happen in the best neighborhoods and worst neighborhoods. Your time's up, your time's up.
Yeah. That's fascinating. I just couldn't, I think, because you have to be macho, but you have to have your street smarts, like to know how to handle a guy with the gun to the back of your head. You can't be some like textbook cop. You got to be able to think, okay, let's play it cool. If I was buying drugs, I would obviously be willing to do it right now.
You have to have your PhD from the street.
Yeah. So I think that's why you're so credible to be able to do that, is because you grew up in that community.
And also, true, that did help a lot. But also, it's very scary to have someone point a gun at you and
Must be
want to
terrifying.
take your life. I mean, it's you can talk, you can try to get out of it that way, but it usually doesn't happen. Understand something about gunfights, with a gun. In New York City, the average gunfight happens with between 7 and 10 feet.
Whoa, that's super close.
In less than 3 seconds.
Holy wow, that's a stat I would, because I don't know, I don't own a gun. I've messed around with a gun for like hunting, but yeah, I would never imagine that close and that quick.
Well, those are the stats of New York City. And a bullet travels our guns today travels about 1,200 feet a second.
That's wild. That's something I wanted to bring up is, gun policy in America. I'm very curious your opinion as, you've seen both sides of the coin as a father with 2 sons. You know how important safety is, but you also are a cop on the street. So what are your thoughts on gun policy in America?
I think it's out of control. There are more guns on the street today than there are more people in the United States. There are over 330 million guns on the street. And it's so easy to get a gun if you wanted to get a gun. I mean, you just have to have money and you have to have the right, connection. It's not hard at all. And also you can get a gun legally too, as long as you pass certain requirements that each state is different.
Exactly. That's what I find. I only learned this maybe 5 years ago. I learned it when I went to school in 2010 or 2011 up in Vermont. In Vermont, you don't need nothing but like a driver's license.
Same thing in Ohio.
Same thing in Ohio, sure. So that's just, it's because you can go up there and bring it down so easily. And I guess that's what gun running is.
Well, yeah, it's the value, the money in guns, they're expensive, but they can be gotten. I worked a 3-year undercover operation with the FBI down in the Fulton Fish Market in Manhattan before it moved to the Bronx. And it took us a year of working every single day down there in an undercover capacity to finally buy a gun. And the gun dealer, he ran the coffee truck, the coffee catering truck. And the code word to buy a gun was muffins and magnums. And, we ended up buying about 25 guns from him. But it was just amazing how easy it was. If you had the money, you can buy anything.
Wow, that's fascinating. So it seems like you think we just have too many guns. Do you think that it should just be more regulated? What are your thoughts on how to maybe correct the problem?
Well, I don't think we need assault rifles. That's number one.
Okay, so AR-15s is
AR-15s.
That's the trendy word to say is just no more AR-15s.
AK-47s, anything that's semi-automatic, automatic. We don't need that.
Don't need it.
No. If you're going to do hunting, I think we have to change the laws in licensing. New York City is very, very tough to get a carry permit. There are 3 types of permits to get a handgun in New York City. It's very easy to buy a long gun in New York City or anywhere in the United States.
So something that you can't conceal because it's too big.
Right. So you have to, in New York City, there are 3 types. As I said, there's the carry permit, there's a target permit, and there's a premise permit. And to get a carry permit, it's extremely hard. And it should be that way. Other states, it's very different. Florida, anyone can get a carry permit.
Yeah, I think that that's probably one of the biggest problems is the disconnect between federal and state. Is you have like the federal government who says one thing, but then it really comes down to the states, and then you have all these people like from all different viewpoints, and yet we're supposed to vote for one president. This is going a little bit off topic.
I know, but the politics prevails a lot. You have the NRA, the National Rifle Association. It's a big lobbyist group that lobbies and gives a lot of money to politicians to keep their organization active. A lot of people believe in the Second Amendment, that, we should all carry guns. It just doesn't work like that.
Sure.
You know, it's interesting because if you think that you have a gun and you're going to shoot somebody and you're going to hit them, doesn't work that way.
If that gun is sitting in your safe for 10 years and all of a sudden you think you're going to use it, but you haven't touched it in 10 years, you might be more dangerous to yourself than.
True.
That's kind of my perspective. True. Unless you really know how to use it. I think there are valid uses for a gun, and, you know, for self-defense and all of that, there are good reasons to have it. But as you said, I don't think you need AR-15s and these things that are just like killing machines.
I agree. I totally agree with you. But again, you know, you can go. I was in Ohio visiting family, and I couldn't believe I went to a local community gun sale. And again, you just showed your driver's license. You can walk out with a handgun, a shotgun, crossbows, anything you wanted. Wow. It was amazing to see it, and I was very surprised.
Yeah, I think we'll see how it develops over the time. One other thing that I definitely wanted to touch on while speaking to you, because I know you were around New York City for 9/11, and I kind of just want to give you that and ask you to share your 9/11 story. What do you remember? How do you remember going down as a police officer in New York City?
Well, prior to 9/11, I thought in my tenure over 20 years, over 25 years at the time, that I saw everything. 9/11 woke me up. I'll never forget it. I was coming down the West Side Highway. I was working, and I was just coming back from a job uptown. I think it was in Washington Heights, and I'm on the West Side Highway, and my dispatcher calls me and says, "Hey, Sarge, we just had a small plane hit the World Trade Center." And I said to him, and I was pretty close at the time, I said to him, that wasn't a small plane, it was a big plane. It was a commercial airline. And at that point I said, hold it. It was about a little after 8 in the morning, 8 something. And I said, get on the radio and get every detective citywide in the 5 boroughs working. And I'm going to set up a command post at the downtown athletic club, which was right next to the World Trade Center, but a little further down. So I did that, and I was calling all the different detectives that were working from night watches from midnight to 8 detectives from the other 4 boroughs. We started getting people in there, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I honestly couldn't believe what I was seeing. The first day there, I saw only one complete body. After that,
oh Jesus,
yeah, I only saw body parts.
Yeah,
and it was just so traumatic. I still remember when I see a plane on a certain angle. I remember the second plane when it hit and had that angle that it was flying into the second tower of the World Trade Center. And also, I remember one of the strangest things that always remains of me is the color of all the body parts that we saw, no matter what color you were, if you were white, black, Hispanic, Asian, all of them came out in a clay color, I guess from the building supplies that were in the building as it collapsed. And I remember the people falling in the thump. I still remember that sound. And it just, stuff remains with you. And the interesting part, the first week that I was there, and I spent a year down there because I was running my job. Then I was running Manhattan Detectives midnight to 8. So I'd have to go down every midnight. We had a command post there and check in to see if we have any body parts that have to be chain of command, we call it, where we'd take it from there to the morgue. And it was just unbelievable to see that and to see the things that went on and the dedication from all over the world. I mean, we had a point at one time where they would have cadaver dogs. You know what a cadaver dog is? Finds dead bodies. And then we had the regular dogs that would find live bodies. And the live body dogs, we actually had to lay down and let them find us because psychologically, they weren't finding anyone alive, and it would damage them. It's their
Oh my
Pavlovian
goodness.
train. They're conditioned to find. They get rewarded when they find a live body. So it was. I'll never forget any of it. It was the most bizarre, tragic incident I ever saw in my life. And there's a lot of things that went on that I really can't talk about, but it just, you worry now. I worry now because I think of what's the next terrorist attack to New York or any city for that matter, small, big, or large. And you think about biological warfare, and I read so much about that. I don't know what the answer is, and if we did, we'd solve a big crime. But 9/11 has just remained with me in many different ways, and I'll never forget it till the day I die.
Yeah, I mean, my story is completely different from yours. I was so young, but what's interesting is everyone has a story. Every American has a story about 9/11. For me, I was in 4th grade. I'm sitting there in math class, and then, the principal comes in and tells the teacher. And then by the end of the day, I'm sitting, like, they let the whole class go early. And then I'm sitting there with my brother watching it on the news as, like, there's helicopters filming what's going on. And what I remember is repeating to my brother, you're never going to forget this day. Only because some other parent told me that. So I thought I was, wise saying that to my little brother, like, you're never going to forget this day.
Now, I remember seeing the second plane. I was there when the second plane hit, and it just blew me away. I remember the other thing that got me crazy. We had very bad communications between the police department and the fire department. And I was going over to the South Tower to talk to the fire chief who was in charge. And just as I got called to go, just as I went to see him go walking into the tower, my chief called me and said, get to my office forthwith. And we got to go over some stuff. And as I left, the building collapsed. I would have not been here today.
Oh, my goodness.
It's in God's hands. It was terrible. And you know what? I try to forget it, and I can't forget it. But I will say this. Everyone that I saw there from other countries, from other states, from all law enforcement, city, state, and federal, they really worked very hard, and they worked like a well-oiled machine. We all worked together. Mm-hmm. And the other thing that I thought was something, the first week being down there, people who you wouldn't suspect would come over and say thank you to you. And like when we spoke about earlier today, people, not liking cops. Zeus, come here. But anyway.
You said people not liking cops coming up to you?
Yeah, you'd see kids that were, from uptown or other parts of the city that going up to you and say, one kid came over to me and said, we never really liked cops, but thank you for what you're doing right now.
Right.
Thank you for what you're doing.
Yeah, I remember it was, I think it was a month after it happened, my parents actually took me down to the site, and it was still a complete wreck. Like, it took, as you said, you were there for a year, or people, like, you were in and out, people were there for a year fixing and recovering, and the details that you just told me about, the dogs that find one type of body and the dogs that are looking for another, that is probably going to haunt me for a little bit. But yeah, I remember going down there, and you would stand by the wreckage, and it was just incomprehensible to think that could happen in New York City. It blew my mind.
Well, that can happen anywhere.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know if you're familiar in the news. Jon Stewart was recently notable for talking to Congress about the 9/11's Victim Act.
Right, I saw that, and I saw the detective from the bomb squad, Louis Alvarez,
who recently passed away. And it's so true. Many people are dying, and it's very sad.
It's just so much debris and so much illness is happening. It's unbelievable. It really is.
Yeah.
And I must tell you, if it wasn't for him, and I can't understand why, Congress would not pass that. I mean, we give so much money to other countries to help other people that are victims of major tragedies and earthquakes and tsunamis. This is a no-brainer. It's a no-brainer.
Right. His line was like, "You said you would never forget," and it looks like you're paraphrasing. Like, today, it looks like you've forgotten. Such a powerful sentence, and unfortunately, it took a celebrity like Jon Stewart to make that happen. Imagine if he wasn't there, it might have not happened.
No,
it's terrifying. Right. And like, what blew my mind, more than half of Congress was just not present.
Yeah, I agree with you.
They didn't show up for the meeting. I mean, it baffles me. Like, I'm not educated in law or government enough to say, but if you don't show up for your job, what's going on there? Why could that possibly be possible? Don't get it.
They didn't look at it as a priority. But it's thank God it's going to be taken care of, and there are many of us that are sick and need the help and need to have this continue, because it doesn't discriminate. It just, anyone who is down there can really be sick. And I went this last week alone. I had 2 people die, Alvarez and another person. Yeah. It's terrible. It really is. You don't think it happened in the United States.
It's absolutely terrible. It shocks me even to think about it this day. But the one thing that came out of it was how united America felt afterwards. It was, everyone says this, and I think you've already touched on it, how brought together people were after that. So did you feel like that? Like,
yeah, the first week. But as time went on, it wore off a little bit. But yes, it was amazing. I got letters from kids in schools. I got letters from people thanking the police department for what we did. And it's important. In tragedies like this, it's not getting money from someone. It's getting the thank you that counts.
Definitely. Yeah. But a full year you spent down there. That's fascinating. I want to wrap up with one question I had.
Sure.
You are a man who lived many lives and interacted with many different people from many different walks of life. As a person who knows both sides of the coin to this country, how do you think President Trump won favor with the country, and how do we become divided again? It doesn't need to be necessarily like a political thing about Trump, but I think the most easiest thing to agree on is the country does feel divided.
I think the country is totally divided.
So do you have any thoughts on that, or like how it could be reunified? Like, unfortunately, as we've seen, tragedy has been one of the only things that reunifies a country so strongly, as we just talked about. So what are maybe some things that could reunify the country?
The simplest one is to get Congress and the House of Representatives to work together and to sit down and work the problems out, and not say, okay, we'll present the new bill, and then 3 years later, look how terrible things are right now with these young children taken away from their families in immigration, at the border. I mean, that is so tragic. Something like that should have immediate congressional sit down and bring these kids back to their parents, and work on getting some sort of settlement for these people. Remember, my parents, not my parents, but my grandparents, your grandparents or great-grandparents, they all came here somehow from some other place other than the United States. And we're products of that, and we have to be able to work some new system out. Let me say this to you. When I was in the 70s and 80s, when crime was really high in the police department, the biggest problem is that you didn't have enough judges, you didn't have enough assistant district attorneys, you didn't have enough correction officers. Cops were making a lot of arrests, and it was like a funnel. They take them to central booking, and they would then process them, and the system would get clogged because they didn't have enough judges to hear the cases, not enough assistant district attorneys to prosecute the cases, and you didn't have enough corrections officers or law enforcement officers to work with the system. That's the same thing what's happening with ICE. We don't have enough judges to get in there and work the problem out now. I mean, a lot of the people that are coming over here, they're doing this for their kids, future.
Yeah. They're not trying to be criminals.
They're not trying to be criminals, but when they come over the border illegally, then they step into the penal law. But the bottom line is we have to come up with something that Congress works together. I mean, to have one congresswoman go over and start talking about it's like the Nazis in World War II Germany, concentration camps, that's only going to give her headlines. She has to sit down with her peers and also with the senates and work this problem out, all of them together. It's a no-brainer. It's it seems that all these politicians are just out for themselves, and I don't have answers for it. Trump, he's the president of the United States. I find that I don't want to get into my political feelings towards it because it's this isn't the topic of conversation. But we have a tough road ahead of us, a real tough road ahead of us.
I think that is our biggest strength and our biggest weakness, as much of a cliche that is, that we are divided as a country because we're divided because we come from so many different cultural backgrounds. So that's going to initially divide us. That's going to make us weak. But our strength is that we have so many different cultural backgrounds and we're educated from so many different places. And when you put those minds together in a positive way, it can be such a good thing. I think, unfortunately, it did terrible things for us in the election when, it's pretty clear that the Russians interfered just with misinformation. Misinformation alone divided the country, I think. This doesn't need to be a conversation of who you think needs to be president. It's the fact that we were divided as a country through many different things, not just, Russian interference. This is the way that social media works. So I don't know if you might not be on social media, but it's a big part of my life. And the way that, for example, you communicate on Facebook is you post a status and then people comment underneath it. And the things that Facebook is going to show you, Wally, is the things that are most, they're going to create the most engagement, going back and forth with people you don't agree with. And this is going to lead people towards misinformation. So are you familiar with that at all? Or would you have any thoughts on misinformation and how powerful that is against us?
It's very powerful. But, it is also, you have to know who the misinformation people are. It's so social media is so, it's in real time and it gets out, and then the rumor control board gets involved, and then they start spreading this rumor and turn it into that rumor. It's like
a game of telephone.
It's like that game of telephone. But again, we definitely have to change the way our government is running right now. We definitely have to become a different type of government where everyone is working together and not being so separated. And it's a very scary issue. It really is. Now you're starting to see things where just saying the wrong word can ruin your life.
Yeah, that's something that I have a problem with. And that's why I love these podcasts is long form conversation allows you to elaborate past like a 30-second clip of you saying something on, an interview, like I give you an hour, 2 hours, however long you want to be able to explain yourself and think through your ideas. And even if you're thinking through ideas, you don't need to get it right on the first go. For me, this is like a thought exercise. And I have a problem with people crucifying other people based on something they said in one 30-second clip.
Gotcha.
Which I think is what you were getting at, is like, that's where the root of the problem is for me. It's like, not because you said something stupid. Like, first of all, you should be allowed to say something stupid and mess up. Like, everyone has that right, I feel like. But eventually, you just can't like call someone out for something they said 10 years ago and think that it applies today.
It doesn't. Some of it does, but most of it doesn't.
Yeah.
Because things change so radically. I mean, look at California, New York City. Now there's a law where you can have your hairstyle any way. Certain groups, blacks, Hispanics.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if they want to braid their hair, they can. They can't be criticized for that. If they want to have,
You have to make a law for that?
New York City did, California, the whole state did.
Wow.
That you can wear, certain groups can wear their hair any way they want.
So are you saying they had to make a law to be able to make that possible? Otherwise, you would be discriminated against?
At work, yeah, your boss can say, cut those dreadlocks off.
Oh my goodness.
Those braids, or your hair's too long.
Yeah, I didn't hear about that. See, wow. I think it should just go without saying. Like, why would you discriminate someone based on but I guess you kind of have to put it on paper in order to make it so so people have rights.
I don't know. There are more important issues out
Right.
there than, having braids or no braids in your hair.
Right. What I found most interesting about what you said was getting the House and the Congress and the government to just work more together. Because I'm always so surprised how things get like lost in communication, or just things don't get passed through. It's like roadblocks. I don't understand it.
To be continued and see.
Yeah, to be continued. Well, Wally, thank you so much for your time. This has been a great talk. And thank you for inviting me to your house. I think maybe I'll see you again in a year.
I hope so.
Continue it up.
I hope so.
Awesome. All right. Bye, guys. Boom. That's it. Thanks so much for listening. I really am excited about how this podcast is turning out, but I can always improve. I would love to hear your feedback. If you want to reach out and suggest I talk about something specific or have a specific guest on, you can email me at shanghaiobserved@gmail.com. That is shanghaiobserved@gmail.com. Also, this episode of the podcast is brought to you by shanghaiobserved.com/shop. That's right, I'm plugging my own shop. It means so much that people already buy my stuff. If you want to support me, you can go to shanghaiobserved.com and buy a shirt or whatever's on there right now. Even if you buy a sticker, it really supports and helps me do what I love to do. I owe it all to you guys. Thank you so much for listening and supporting me. Thanks a bunch. Peace, guys. Also, if you enjoyed the intro and outro music, it was made by my brother, Danny Greenberg. You can go and check out his beats at soundcloud.com/estoric. ESTORIC. Okay, that's it for now. Peace.